Coincidence is a miracle in which God prefers to remain anonymous. There are no accidents, and certainly on the United Nations International Day of Peace, when I had the honor and privilege of being invited to New York by the Nobel family to receive the first ever Earth Ethics Award, I had the privilege and opportunity to meet an incredible moderator. Would you raise your hand, please? Thank you. And a beautiful woman who came up to me after your excellent job moderating our panel, the beautiful Anne. And that day also coincided with the 22nd anniversary of the vision of turning mines to vines, killing fields into vineyards, blood into wine, and really creating, as I've heard today, the roots of peace on earth. For it begins with the eradication of a single landmine and the planting of a seed of life. We live in a world today where there's an estimated 70 million landmines silently poised in 70 countries. As a mother of 4 children and a grandmother of 3 beautiful grandchildren, I know that it takes approximately 8 pounds to give birth to a child, and it also takes 8 pounds to detonate a landmine. I'm going to tell my journey today like I've really never told it before, because as many of you, I'm concerned. I was concerned about the funding. If I tell the true story, why am I doing this? You know, many people ask me, do you have family who were mine victims? You know, why are you so passionate about this? Well, it all began when I was a little girl. I was in kindergarten. It was a beautiful day. It was actually raining, and I was coloring beautiful color pictures with my kindergarten buddy, Michael Pelfini. And we were really trying to stay in the lines and, you know, get a really good gold star. And all of a sudden, on this rainy day, our mothers came in, and, you know, as little children, you know your timing, and it was off. And they had little yellow raincoats, and they put them on us. And teardrops were falling from our parents' eyes, all of them. And I looked at Michael. We looked so puzzled. And we went to our dear teacher at Dominican Garden School in San Rafael, California, and said, how do we make all the mommies and daddies stop crying? She cut my little face into her hands and said, dear Heidi, go home and pray for peace, for our dear President John F. Kennedy was just assassinated. And from the heart of a child that night, I prayed. And be it a dream, be it a vision, but the most beautiful woman came into my bedroom, and I will never forget, radiating golden light. And as a child, I got down on my knees, and I prayed. And I didn't hear anything audibly, except a golden light of peace, peace, and only peace. And that dream carried forth the rest of my life. I continued to seek an education for peace, and in the 1970s, went to the University of California at Berkeley, where at that time, the Vietnam War was raging. I met the love of my life on campus and went on to marry him, and as life goes, you know, the destiny will follow you till the ends of the earth. Those ends of the earth led to Alaska, because he was IBM manager for the state of Alaska. IBM, I've been moved, but never ever thought it was Juneau in January. So fast forwarding, you know, I thought, what am I going to do in the dark with a 1, 3, and 5-year-old? And I had a little magic trick. I applied to the local weather station or television station, and they put me on. It said, your weather anchor on the 6 o'clock news tomorrow night. So it was sink or swim. And from that, I had another vision. My husband went back to Poughkeepsie, and I maybe had a little too much time on my hands, haha. But I started my own television news company, and when he came back, he said, what are you going to report on, cold weather and bears? And I said, trust me, it's women's intuition. 3 weeks later, the Exxon Valdez hit Bly Reef, and I ended up as the CNN reporter, covering 11 million gallons of oil spilling in the Prince William Sound. But I thought there's another story of peace going on here, and that dream kept coming back to me. And that was the melting of the ice curtain between US-Soviet relations. So I decided to take my camera with all my Cubby experience and go to Moscow in 1979. I'm sorry, 1989. And as I was flying, the Berlin Wall was falling. I learned Russian. Здравствуйте, доброе утро, меня зовут Heidi, right? Как дела? But what happened when I arrived in the room, Andrei Sakharov had just died, and Gennady Gerasimov, who was the first face of perestroika, gave me the first interview. So I thought, this is great, life is great. I got it up on CBS News with Dan Rather and came home and, you're feeling kind of good. Well, my neck started to hurt, and I went to the doctor, and there's no gynecologist in the state of Alaska. Went up for a checkup, and she said, you're having a full checkup. Turned out I was diagnosed with malignant cancer. And that stops you dead in your tracks. And you look into the eyes of your beautiful children, 1, 3, and 5, and when you go under the knife, you make a deal with you and your maker. Dear God, grant me the gift of life, and I will do something special with it. Life went on, and just as that moment of John F. Kennedy, we saw Princess Diana, who brought her compassion and love and light to the issue of landmines. Well, just about that time, I went back to the doctor with a terrible stomach ache, again with those 3 little babies, and he came back after testing me. He couldn't talk, he had tears in his eyes. He said, Mrs. Kuhn, you have a miracle, you're pregnant. So I have 4 children now, and his name is Christian, and I couldn't think of a better gift from God. But, my friends thought, you're hanging up your cleats, you're just going to be a good stay-at-home mommy. Well, as I looked in the eyes of that little child, I saw the issue of landmines, and I heard about it. And right when Princess Diana died, people knew I had some international connections and asked me if I would host an event in the living room of my home, for she had just tragically died in August of 1997. September 21st, 3 weeks later, I lifted my glass in the living room of my home and said, may the world go from mines to vines. Today, Roots of Peace began our journey in Croatia shortly after watching the horror of the Balkan War, and decided to go over there in January of 2000. And through the vintners of the Napa Valley, Robert Mondavi, Mienko Grgic, Diane Disney Miller, we raised $30,000 to begin demining in a place called Dragalic, near the border of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and near a tragic place called Vukovar, which 154,000 homes were burned and only 4 remained. So when you see that in the first month of the new millennium, I left my husband and 4 children. God bless him for being the best husband in the world, because a lot of people in your own backyard don't understand that vision. So many times they said to me, you're just a California mother. Stay home. You can't change the world. Well, we kept marching, and September 11th hit, and we realized that as the towers tragically fell, that there was Afghanistan. And it was a country that was 80% dependent upon agriculture. And the mines to vines could be applied there. So I drove on instinct to University of California at Berkeley and gathered the rootstocks, 70 varietals of grapes, and had them shipped to Afghanistan. We planted since that day 5 million fruit trees in all 34 provinces, pomegranates in Kandahar and Helmand, apricots and apples and almonds in Ghazni Wardak Logar, north of Kabul, fresh grapes, never fermented with due respect to the Muslim culture, turning mines to vines. And one of the greatest honors I've had in my life was this last 9/11, when I was on the plane, on the tarmac in Kabul, Afghanistan. My next door neighbor, Lauren Grancolis, 2 months pregnant with her first child, had died on Flight 93 on September 11th. But yet here I was with a cargo full of fresh fruits, flying those fruits from Afghanistan to Mumbai, India, and with the support of our US government, which has now given Roots of Peace over $100 million under contract, managed by a woman, We flew those grapes to India, and they're now being sold in the supermarkets of Reliance and Big Bazaar. And those of you in the Indian family know the beautiful stories of the Kabuli wallas, because the best fruit comes from a country that's shaped like a leaf. And it's time to turn over a new leaf and not be war-weary about Afghanistan, but to see it with a new light. This is a moment in history to garner a harvest of hope. We've continued our journey. Last month, I had the honor of being in Africa once again. We worked in Angola because it's not only the humans that step on landmines, but it's the giant elephants. And they have the most sensitive paws, and they sense the thunder in the ground. And as they blow up and the carcasses are left along the ancient migration routes of Africa, roots of pieces uprooting those landmines so that the animals don't infringe upon the food sources where man and beast live side by side, and where they're shooting now the elephants to prevent their food source. Landmines are evil. I'll just call that out. But the power of love is the power to plant peace. And as many of you said in this room with that beautiful diagram, a seed when planted today with sunlight, water, and a human hand will bloom as it has for thousands of years. A cold, inert landmine only yields a deathly harvest. So as I conclude here, I'd like to invite a special guest up, but also just reminiscent of this beautiful month of May, a month where May flowers bloom on former minefields. But let's use our imagination, as so many people said in this room here today. A few days ago, I had the honor of being the keynote speaker at the Leonardo Museum in the state of Salt Lake City, Utah. Leonardo da Vinci turned 500 years old, 500 years of his death. But he didn't think in silos of science, humanities, arts. He thought in a holistic and visionary way where he projected and saw so much of what we're able to see here today. Can you imagine, all of you, a world without landmines? As we wrote our visionary legacies, I hope with the footsteps that that God gives me for the rest of my life, that I can see a world where we eradicate all landmines by 2025. It's entirely in our capacity, for they cost $3 to put in the ground and about $1,000 to take out. And as we consider investments in various projects around the world, I think rather than investing in walls, we should invest in development and peace, and turn swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, so that nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. It is now my great honor. None of us does this by themselves. Again, if I've seen further than others, it's only because I've stood on the shoulders of giants, and giants like Lynn Twist and others who've taught me the soul of money and how we take that currency of the heart and bring it forth in the world. But I'd now like to, I couldn't have done this without my family, and I'd like to have the honor of introducing the woman I most admire in the world. A young woman who at 13 years old was brave enough on her birthday, May 1st, to walk through a minefield with her mother. And as she saw that all the children growing up in Marin County don't really necessarily have the best pair of blue jeans, that's not the most important thing as a rite of passage of 13 years old, but it's having two legs to put those jeans on. And Kylie went back to her high school, and with ABC News anchor Cheryl Jennings, started raising pennies, 1 penny at a time, for peace. Kylie raised 50 million American pennies to build schools for girls in Afghanistan. And while all we hear is the bad news of Afghanistan, I consider it a harvest of hope, because those children are still going to school in Mirbochakot, in a school made of pennies. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to introduce my daughter, Heidi Kuhn.
Thank you, Mom. She's my best advocate, obviously. I'm so glad that I had some time to meditate, too, before speaking. I'm not quite as eloquent as my mother, but I'll do my best. Hearing your conversation with Arta, I connected so much to what you were talking about with empathy and how to transform empathy into action. And I think something that, ever since I was 13 years old, going and seeing all of these, you do sometimes react and have a emotional reaction. I'm feeling a little emotional right now. When you see suffering. And the way that I found to be able to transform that suffering within myself, you see somebody going through something so difficult, it's not unusual to want to feel that feeling and react in that emotional way that I think you were getting at. And so, if you're able to look within and find the gifts that you have as an individual and find ways to share, creative ways to share them. So that's what we did initially with the penny campaign. I was able to raise enough funds to build these schools, and going back to Afghanistan and following in my mother's footsteps, it showed me so much light and love and how to connect with that ability to share your love with the world in a grounded way. So, as I grew into a woman and went to UC Berkeley as well, and had a unique journey of my own and really finding what my footsteps would look like. And so what I've kind of done is found these different ways to find what brings me inner joy rather than only connecting in with the suffering of others. Because I think that's a trap sometimes we can fall into, of wanting to feel the feelings of others and feel the pain of others, maybe feel the nerves of others. Maybe you guys are feeling my nerves. And that actually doesn't quite help another person. What helps is when you're able to find your inner light and your inner joy, and ways that your joy can, spread this new feeling towards others. So for me, what that means is being able to create beautiful pieces. I love art. I wanted to follow in my mother's footsteps, and I have. But what brings me joy is artisans and being able to create beauty, and that's now what I'm doing is creating software to be the platform for artisans and craftsmen around the world, but really connecting in with the local communities. You were mentioning before the importance of imagining a new world, and I imagine that in the future we're going to be buying things from hopefully our local artisans, people who make plates in their home in San Francisco. Maybe you connect in with a potter and go to her home and see the joy that she puts into that work, and you go there instead of IKEA maybe, and that way we can kind of build this artisanal craft and love. And I connected to that because of my pathway with Afghanistan and going and falling in love with the jewelry and the carpets in Afghanistan. As much as I was connecting in with this feeling of empathy with what they needed. So I created these connections with the artisans there, and I make jewelry and carpets with the artisans in Afghanistan as my way of creating beauty and sharing design, because that's really what opens up my heart. And so I think on this path towards transformation, it's all about integration and how we integrate these, empathy is like a seed that's planted within us. And when you can find, you water that empathy and give it enough love, after a while you can kind of bring that out into the light and let it, thank you, and let it kind of come to fruition in whichever way allows your spirit to shine. And I think that's hopefully the path that I've found for myself and will continue to find and continue to transform as there's new experiences with empathy, and we allow that empathy to guide us into our next decisions. So thank you, Mom, for exercising my empathy since a young age.